Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Collective Roundtable. Hope everyone had a great long weekend, and thank you so much for joining us early this Monday morning after your long weekend. I'm Simran, your MC for today's event. For our Impact Breakfast today, we will unpack what building thriving and sustainable communities looks like in our neighborhoods. Today, we have an exciting lineup of speakers, starting with Cormac Russell, a veteran practitioner of asset-based community development, ABCD for short, along with a diverse panel comprising experts and local community builders in Yishun from the health, social, and community spaces. Here to kickstart our Impact Breakfast, let us welcome Mr. Martin Tan, CEO of the Majority Trust.
Simran. Good morning, everyone. Oh, that's not too bad. Seems like everybody had a long weekend. Let me try that again. Good morning, everyone. Hey, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I was just talking to some friends earlier that when we were planning this, normally our Impact Breakfast, we sort of have maybe about 30, 35 folks coming together, donors, partners. And then the team told me, we have sort of an expanded request. I said, what? We're close to over 70 people here. So I just want to say a big thank you. And I know this is possible not because Majority Trust is running the event, but because we have Cormac, who's here with us. So a big round of applause for Cormac. Thank you for spending the week with us. We were having dinner last night, and I was looking at this schedule. It's like he has no nights available except on tonight. Tonight's the only night available. He's working right through the entire time. Thank you, everyone. I thought what would be good, since it's after the long weekend, it's after National Day, instead of just me just reading off what I was given, I thought what we would do is just something very, very quickly. Why don't we all stand? For those of you who have your coffee, so put it a bit further away, just in case, or put it under the chair. I'm going to ask you to find a partner beside you. Now, the Olympics just closed yesterday. How many of you are a big fan of the Olympics? Okay, so we got a bronze medal, which is great, which is awesome. Can I just say, I've lived through times when we start Olympics and we have never had a feeling that we could have a medal. Remember those days? Yeah, but now it's like, only bronze only. No. It's a really good progression. So please find a partner beside you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to face them squarely. And your goal is to score as many points as you can by tapping on the person's shoulder. All right? Your job is to try to escape so that you can perhaps have a bit more points. All right? So the music is going to play. Simran, would you come up for a minute? All right. I'm going to do a positive demonstration at the moment. Simran is my partner. My goal is try to tap as best as possible. She's going to try. And your goal is to have as many points as possible. All right? Ready? By the count of 3. 1, 2, 3, go. All right, 15 more seconds. 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well done. Give yourself a big round of applause. Please grab a seat. Thank you very much. How many of you think you won? Yes. It's a tie. Very good. So, how many of you sort of beat your opponent? Yes. Very, very cool. The goal of the game is to score as many points as possible. Very good. The alternative is to give them all the goals. So I'm going to invite Cormac and Eugene to come up on stage for us. This is what they did. And it's going to be key. So we've asked them and said, hey, okay, your goal is to score as many points as possible. This is what they did. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Now, I sort of set you up because I use Olympics as a goal. And then all of a sudden, when we think about scoring points, it was about gold, silver, bronze. So I sort of teed you up. But the goal of collaboration is really about working together and achieving each other's goals. That sometimes really isn't competition. Sometimes it's just the ability to cooperate with each other, to collaborate with each other. And our topic for today and our goal for this whole week when Cormac is here is the idea of community building. We talk about A, B, C, D, and I'm not going to steal the thunder because Cormac is going to share a whole lot more. But I guess for us at the Majority Trust, this is our goal. Our goal is the ability to create platforms like this to bring people together and say, what does collaboration actually look like? There is no work within the community that can take place effectively if our goal is about competition, is who's scoring more points. If we have the ability to look each other in the eyeball to eyeball and say, hey, we can actually do this. Sometimes you're going to win more. Sometimes I'm going to win more. Sometimes together we're going to win a whole lot more together. There's so much we can actually do together. That's our heartbeat, and I'm so happy because I see so many partners we have here whom we have been working together closely. Thank you for trusting us with a friendship. Thank you for working with us and the partnership that we have. And we want to be able to carry this forward. For the longest time, we've been doing this at Majority Trust in terms of the funds that we have. And recently, with Thriving Communities, we moved now to the place base where we have in Yishun, in Chong Pang area, and bring the partners together. And Cormac is going to spend some time there on Saturday, if I remember correctly. And that's really all part of what we are trying to do. So today, please really use this time to get to know each other. And I hope that through this platform, new partnerships can be formed, new collaboration can be formed. And throughout the week when Cormac is here, there's going to be a whole lot more conversation. We have a great lineup of speakers. I'm going to let the MC introduce them later with Sui Fan and with folks from Yishun. I just want to say a big thank you because we can't do this without partners who believe and join us on this endeavor together. So would you please give the panelists a big round of applause? Thank you very much. And last but not least, would you please help me thank our speaker, and which I think Simran will be introducing him later on, to thank and welcome Cormac Russell. So Simran, back to you.
Thank you, Martin. Certainly looking forward to lots more collaborations to come. So next up, as Martin shared, we have Cormac Russell himself. Over the last 25 years, Cormac's work has had an impact in 35 countries, training communities, agencies, NGOs, and governments worldwide. In the next segment, Cormac will share about building stronger, thriving communities using asset-based approaches, drawing from his international insights and work with communities across Singapore. Cormac, please.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great to be here this morning. And I was just thinking of such a great opening. It really was, because so many of us, I think, have been socialized into this idea that for me to win, you must lose. And challenging that idea, and at the heart of that, of course, philanthropy challenges that idea if it's doing it well. So I have a few minutes to share some thoughts around where we're seeing promising practice around philanthropy. And what I want to try to do is weave those ideas into what I think is a very diverse landscape in terms of the kind of change that we're hoping to see in the world. And I think at its heart, it's about cooperation. So that shift from competition to cooperation. But the biggest challenge often isn't so much shifting from competition to cooperation. Sometimes I think we can be very cooperative as long as we're allowed to stay in the lead. So the other challenge I want to see today is this idea that we're relocating authority out of spaces where traditionally we are foregrounded as the leaders, as the ones that know, as the financiers. And we start figuring out how we could put community in the driving seat of change. Why? Because we're nice people, maybe? That's a good reason. But I think a more solid reason is because it is more sustainable in the longer term, and it's more democratic as we go forward. So with that as a little bit of an introduction, let's move on. So I guess one of the first things that's worth saying is that it's really helpful when you're trying to birth or doula a new way of being in the world to recognize that you've got to hospice the old way of being in the world. So this idea that there are two stories in competition with each other, like this morning we saw through Martin's opening, is an important one. Because when we're asking people to plug into new ideas, we really have to be thoughtful about what we're asking them to unplug from. So let me talk about what I think we're unplugging from around the world. This is nobody's fault. This is everybody's challenge. So the dominant story, I think, when it comes to change and when it comes to enabling individuals, families, and communities to be well, is the story that says your wellness, my wellness, and particularly the wellness of people who are economically marginalized, is contingent on institutions that are represented here by triangles getting their act together. So my health is in the hands of my doctor. It's in the arena of the hospital. My well-being is it's contingent on how good the social work training is in this country and so forth. But that idea is a very dangerous idea if taken past its own watershed. It's got its place. Obviously, institutions and programs are important. But what I'm showing you here is a picture. It's a dominant story. And there's a word for this story. The word is institutionalization. Now, in lots of ways, this has become the dominant story, just like competition. It says not alone will we provide for your needs as institutions, but we're also going to figure out how to do that in an interagency, wraparound, seamless, integrated, coordinated way. Such virtuous words. What's not to love with those words? Partnership. So isn't that such a lovely word? Often when you turn down the words like partnership and you actually look at the practice behind words like partnership, what you find is exactly what Martin was teaching us. That partnership is often code for the mutual suppression of loathing in pursuit of government funding. Try saying that with 2 glasses of wine. And what you end up with is this deficit form of thinking. So we start thinking whatever our specialism is, and there'll be different people who are interested in change at different levels. Some of you are here because you're interested in education. Others, it'll be social work, social welfare. And for others, it may be medicine, healing. So we come, I think, at this from very different perspectives. Some may even say we come at change from silos. And as we all know in this room, silos are where smart people go to do dumb things. So what's interesting, I think, about thinking about the neighborhood as a unit of change is it becomes the arena within which we can really cooperate with each other, where we can hug rather than tap for sport. And it's difficult because if we've organized ourselves in the arena of professional specialism, but at the same time we're trying to build parity of esteem with the people that we want to heal and help and support, then we've got to figure out a way of foregrounding their capabilities. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. That's a shift away from specialization. It's a shift away from diagnosing people as needing whatever fix we think they need. And it's a shift towards what we're calling asset-based or strength-based practice. And I know that's not new to many people in the room. I think everybody, even if you're not exposed to the idea of strength-based practice or asset-based practice, I think most people understand that you don't lift people up by putting them down. That makes sense, doesn't it? And if you start trying to make change happen by treating somebody like they're broken, deficient, incapable, incompetent, on their knees, supine, in need of being rescued, that sends a very clear narrative about who's on top and who is not. So what we're really trying to do here is unplug from stories that are counterproductive and try to move into a story at the same time that recognizes that story of well-being one that I described a few moments ago is not all bad. People do need services. There's nothing wrong with services. My point is not that it's bad. What's bad actually is when we create systems and policies and programs where our services have a monopoly on change and the individuals that are receiving the supports feel that they have nothing to bring but their deficiency. When we put a monopoly in that zone of change, it is only a matter of time before we create disablement. And I know nobody here wants to disable communities. So well-being too, the, I think, more substantive story, still features the institutions, but it features the institutions in a supplementary role. So what we're saying here is institutions matter, but the danger is if you can't figure out as a philanthropist or an institution in whatever shape or form you're working with one in, if you can't figure out how to avoid supplanting community agency and you can't figure out how to supplement and enable, then you're probably going to do harm. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. In fact, it kind of does. The more money you have, the more harm you'll probably do. So let's be affirmative today, because I think that's what we're here to talk about. Affirmatively, how can philanthropists, how can donors, how can sponsors of change really work in a more substantive way? And I think it's about putting community first. It's a sequential issue. It's about saying that every individual that we support, we finance, we help, we cheer on, has a gift, has a contribution. They don't just bring their deficiencies or their supposed damage, they bring contributions. The other thing that we're recognizing is that people are, they're moving towards wellness the more integrated, interdependent, and connected they are. The more they can participate and contribute, in other words, the more likely it is that they will prosper. And of course, as you can see here, as well as the individual and their gift, you can see art is not my gift. And the circles which represent the networks and the connections and the groups that are democratizing and running their own affairs in local neighborhoods. That's what represents the circles. The triangles matter, but they're supplementary. They do for community what community cannot do for itself. Why does that matter? In all kinds of ways. It matters because 80% plus of our health is determined not by medicine or what the doctor does, but by the extent to which we are connected in our community life. So our neighborhood belonging, our community influence, our community power, our community cohesion are centrally important determinants of our well-being. And this is not something we can provide for people in a program. It's something we have to enable people to create from the ground up themselves. But there are other reasons, and I think one of the other reasons is less positive. And it's got to do with the poly crisis that we hear so much about. Chief among these crises, of course, is climate transition and climate justice. And certainly a lot of academics are telling us now that we are, certainly in our lifetime, moving towards 3-degree neighborhoods. Now, if that's the case, then I think we have a limited window of time to really figure out what we're going to do around community cohesion. But what's striking is that 21 years ago, 21 years passed, in 2003, there was a heat wave in Europe. And I'm from Europe, so I thought I'd share a European story very quickly. And 70,000 people across Europe died in a matter of, I think, about 11 days in the first 2 weeks of August of that year. France was the epicenter. We now think of France, of course, the Olympics, but it was the epicenter of that crisis, that human crisis. And something like 15,000 people died in France, 5 in Paris. What was going on? Well, in the days after the crisis and people started to realize just what was happening, there was a huge amount of blame being directed at the institutions. But actually, as we began to study 10 and 20 years on, what really was falling apart? What was falling apart was social cohesion. But nobody had recognized it as an issue. Very quickly, because I don't have a huge amount of time, at the very top of these beautiful buildings, and many people go to Paris because it's so beautiful, you see buildings like this, but what you might not notice is at the very top, these buildings are lead-clad. They used to be the chambre de bonne, where essentially they were servants' quarters. They're the hottest part of a building. And many older people living in those buildings lived there because they couldn't afford to live anywhere else, and that's where they died. In fact, 100 people in Paris that year were buried, and nobody claimed them. A book was written by a guy called Kelleher, and he, I think, gave it a perfect title. He called it Fatal Isolation. To this day, 21 years on, those people have nobody visiting them. But even more tragic, that was their life before they died as well. So the question is, how do we do something that not alone helps community cohesion, but reaches to the edges and reaches to the fringes so everybody can contribute? Well, I think there's a number of different things we can say, and we'll hear some wonderful local stories in a few minutes that I think really give grounding to not alone what can happen, but what is happening in Yishun. And I know you have stories too throughout Singapore about how you place community at the center. Let me just say really briefly though, I think one of the key things I'm saying about the two stories is that I believe Wellbeing One has reached the limits of its capacity. It is no longer fit for purpose in the world we live in today. And I think the people who may well be in a curation position are people like you. I think you have a unique ability to be intermediaries between government interventions and individuals who need support. And I think you're in a very strong position to curate a well-being too story that actually says to communities, not alone are you needy, but you're needed. And I'm not going to put words in your mouth because you obviously know what way you want to direct your trust. But let me say to you what I think are some of the promising solutions that are featuring in our world today and see if any of them are fetching or indeed if any of them resonate with the work you do. I think there are three key pathways, solution pathways towards well-being too as the better, more substantive story. The first is this idea that if you're trying to enable people, of course you must work in a person-centered way. Of course people must feel like you are valuing them. But it's also really key that whatever you do creates the conditions where they also feel they can add value to their community. So often what I've seen in philanthropy is wonderful examples of person-centered approaches where programs and initiatives and activities are really valuing the individual, but they're not creating the conditions within which that individual can add value to their community. And that's the key piece. A lot of evidence is now really being mounted, I think compelling evidence. People like Isaac Przyleltensky, who's the great father of a method or an approach called mattering theory, is basically saying the reason why so many of our initiatives don't work is because people feel they're stuck in needy, but that they are not needed. So how do we do philanthropy so people feel needed? You do it through community development. You do it by saying, your gifts are wanted, you have a community, let's make the connections. The second is starting with what's strong rather than what's wrong. And of course, we don't want to ignore issues, but how often do we start our conversations? Our very first handshake with people we're trying to support is, tell me what your needs are, tell me what's wrong. Imagine if we started the conversation with, tell me what's strong, tell me what your desires are. What would you love to do to contribute to the well-being of your community, and how can I back you and invest in you to do that? It's funny, isn't it? Because so many philanthropists come from the world of the commercial. And in the commercial way of thinking, what I've just said makes total sense. But somehow then we often move into the kind of charity model and start thinking in old medical terms. So I really want to say that while it's important to give people the chance to add value, while it's really important to start with what's strong, it's also important to recognize that many people can't participate because they're in a situation which is deeply unjust and unfair. So there can be no wellness without fairness. We've got to get the balance across the three. And I want to share some examples of how, really quickly, and you'll probably notice I'm shifting into third gear here because I don't have a huge amount of time. 4 minutes, 57 seconds left. So we're going to hear some examples from Yishun. I won't steal their thunder, but I do want to value what they're doing. And I do want to say that I spoke at the International Social Prescribing Conference in London recently, and I featured the example of their work. So I think it's really important that you know that you are teaching the world through the work of Dr. Sweet Fun and others. You're really teaching the world what's possible when you decentralize, democratize, and you actually diminish the role of institutions, but start featuring the capabilities of communities. So well done, you. I think the other thing that I want to say is that when we see examples that are really flourishing, what we're often seeing is not just communities, becoming more connected. We're also seeing a change, and I think Yishun is a good example of this as well, a change in how people who are providing services think about power, and a willingness to relocate authority. Not just to foist responsibility away, but to actually say, in all kinds of ways, the story that says your health is in the hands of the doctor is a false story. The story that says your safety is in the hands of police officers is a false story. And actually, see what's happening in the UK around the riots over the weekend? Isn't it really interesting? I mean, so we had a story that started with racism dominating. That was a story, this country is racist, to a savior story. We're going to arrest them all. We're going to show how bad they are. We're going to punish them. To a story that says our community does not stand with this. We stand with the 3 girls that were murdered. We stand with each other. Your place is not here. Change. And that was the most powerful story. So in many respects, when we think about policing and we think about peace and we think about de-radicalization and all of those polarizing issues, it's really important to understand that the most promising examples we're seeing in the world today are actually coming from leaders in police forces who are saying, you know what, we can't do this to or for people. We've got to create the conditions where the communities that are producing the alumni of the prison services have the opportunity to discover, connect, and mobilize their resources. A very good example of that comes from Milwaukee and the Blueprint for Peace, where the leaders actually started talking to each other. So the police force started talking to the medical fraternity, started talking to the philanthropists, and say, what's going on here? And when they compared notes, they all realized it's the same 15 neighborhoods who are producing the alumni of the prison services, of the hospitals, who produce the least high-level completion in school and so forth. So all of the supposed problems had a postal code. They were emerging predominantly from the same place. Does that mean that they should be fixed, that they're broken? No. What everybody agreed was the key issue, the one thing that nobody was doing, was helping that community to cohese, to build a coherent sense of what it desired collectively for its community. And I think in many respects, that's not just about communities, it's also about individuals. I think of people like Judith Snow, who was the first person in Ontario in the late 80s to receive a budget, a personal budget, instead of services. So for the first 30 years of her life, she received services. She was put into institutions because she was quadriplegic, and that's what you do. In the second part of her life, she lived to be 65. She received finance and the belief that she could make her own best decisions for a good life. And she went on to become a key community builder in her own neighborhood and a key activist around disability rights. What's all this mean? Well, let me say in the 43 seconds I've left, I think what it means is that we need to change our perspective. We need to change the paradigm. So instead of looking at people as problems like these wonderful clinical psychologists are doing to the koala, let's take an ecological view of things. Let's ask what's happening in the environment. And instead of addressing mental health, maybe we should be addressing the metaphor of deforestation. Maybe we should be doing both. But I think to do that, we need to recognize there are 2 tools for change. One, of course, is institutions. Of course, it's your programs. Of course, it's your money. But the other is community itself. And these are different operating systems. There are things you can do with your institution which ensure quality control, which make sure people get the services they need, and that's all to the good. But there are things that can be done in community that you cannot do. You can't provide an alternative or a proxy, but what you can do is you can precipitate those things by investing wisely and investing justly. And that's about humility, it's about resisting hubris, and it's about really foregrounding the capabilities of communities and maybe sometimes backgrounding your own capability. It also, I think, is about making a virtue of getting people out of institutions and really lifting up the value of interdependence and interconnection. You can see the trajectory here. So often we have measured success by how many programs are surrounding a person. We feel very proud when all of the professionals sit around and case manage that person. We say, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that what a good life is? But I think we already agreed at the top of the presentation that that's institutionalization. But it's wearing the mask of love. It's time to demask. And I think part of that is recognizing that we cannot do community to or for people. Yes, we can get alongside them, but that's really about recognizing why we would get alongside them. And one of the main reasons is so that they can do together what only community can do. To recognize that there is a unique role, there is work for communities to do. And if they don't do it, it will not get done, no matter how much money is put in. This is why so often philanthropic investment goes into neighborhoods like water into sand. It doesn't stick because we've got to build the social soil in order for that match to work. And so that's how I'd like to finish, with this idea that really the challenge in terms of philanthropy is to figure out how we can support community to do what it is they do best. And I think that starts not just with community engagement, but with community building. We can't engage communities until we first support communities to become communities. It doesn't just happen. But I think once we understand what communities want to do, can do, and desire to do, it's much easier to figure out what we can do for them. And you know, that idea that there are things communities can do by themselves, things they can do with a little bit of help, and things that they, of course, need institutions to do for them. That's how I'd like to finish. That, to me, is the virtuous sequence. And when I look at philanthropy that's making a sustainable and enduring difference, I think that's the sequence they follow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Cormac. If I could please invite you to stay on stage for our panel discussion. Thank you. Your sharing is a powerful reminder to focus on what's strong and not what's wrong, and also the potential for each one of us to further that change in our communities. So to further that conversation, I would now like to invite our panel speakers to join us on stage. First, please, would you join me in welcoming Dr. Wong Sweet Fan, Clinical Director, Population Health and Community Transformation, Khoo Teck Puat Hospital and Yishun Health. Madam Sarima, resident in Yishun and founder of Project Pencil, a ground-up project. Fang Sing Wei, Director of Yishun Family Service Center at Children's Society. And finally, our moderator, Chong Ming Fang, who I will now hand over to. Thank you, Ming Fang.
All right. Hello, everyone, again. And thank you, Cormac, for that very, very lovely opening to help us think about how we can actually shift in our positions, right? About how we conceptualize and think about community. So thrilled to welcome everyone here. In this panel's conversation, we'll be looking and unpacking what community building could look like in Singapore. And we're going to foreground it in the space of Yishun, which is a community located in the north of Singapore. So my name is Ming Fang, and I am with the philanthropy team at the Majority Trust. I think a lot of who I am will also influence the conversation today. So if you just allow me to introduce myself, my background is actually in social work, and I really believe in the spaces of enabling community members to participate meaningfully in the decisions that they make. And so a lot of my time is actually spent in Yishun, in Chong Pang, a neighborhood, where I go up to communities and start with the question of what do you want to do in your community, not just about how you're doing and how I can come in to help you, but it's about the desires and the strengths that they first have. And still fresh in my mind, actually, is coming out of the National Day festivities, right? The long weekend that we had. The theme of this year was Together as One United People. I think it's a fitting start for our conversation today as we think about how we can contribute as citizens and enable more of us to thrive together. All of us here share a deep connection with building communities and strengthening them. And I think there's an increasing recognition, right, that the social needs are growing, they're becoming more complex. But what would it enable people to go alongside, and ecosystem isn't just a buzzword, right? How can we do things together, not just alone? So today, I'm very happy to introduce an incredible lineup of speakers. If you just allow me to briefly introduce them, you've met Cormac Russell, who had the brilliant opening address. We also have Dr. Wong Sweet Fan, who actually works with Yishun Health, and she's been promoting healthy aging and community care within community neighborhood spaces. We also have Madam Sarima, who is actually a resident of Yishun, and she's actually been leading a ground-up project called Project Pencil, where she supports the more vulnerable in her community. Next to me is Mr. Fang Sing Wei, who is the director at Yishun Family Service, operated by Children's Society. So, without further ado, let's get to know our panelists better. If I can just start with Sing Wei, if you can just introduce a bit of the work that you do in Yishun with the team here.
Okay, hi, good morning everyone. My name is Sing Wei. I'm the director from Yishun Family Service Centre, Singapore Children's Society. So I am similar to Ming Fang. I'm trained as a social worker, and so I've been in the social sector for I think more than 10 years. So heading, I'm not sure how much you guys know about Family Service Centre, but I think one of the narratives that have been floating around is that Family Service Centre is a very busy place, that we see rising cases, and we work with families facing very complex challenges. I think that this is also the context that how our agency went into community development work at the start. So in around 2020 and 21, we have close to almost 1,000 cases, which is very high in the context of a FSC. And we did a projection. If nothing changed by 2025, we will most likely hit around 1,500 cases. And when that happens, it's also something that, as an agency, we have put in a lot of effort to increase our headcount. Between 2015 to 2020, around that period, we actually doubled our headcount from a team of 20 social workers to 40 social workers, and yet the cases are increasing. So that's the context that why, as a family service center, we enter into community development work. It's not an aspiration goal, but it's really out of necessity that there's no way for us to sustain our work if we don't do something different. So at that time, I think I'm grateful also for a lot of seniors, brothers, sisters like Dr. Wong, Sarima, even Biling, Justin, that they are the ones who guides me in our earlier year when we enter into this work. Like going around as a social worker, not really knowing about the choice function that Cormac talked about earlier, that in my mind, I'm focusing a lot about control, about providing services, about directing our families on what to do. So I was entering into a world that is really unfamiliar for me. Yeah, but I thought the process was helpful. I think over the last 4 years or so, I think we really changed the approach that we do in our center, and we are starting to see positive changes happening. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you, Sing Wei. So what Sing Wei was just mentioning is that shift in posture, right? As we were seeking difference, community building was a solution in itself. Thank you, Sing Wei. We'd like to also invite Madam Sarima. So I've seen you on the ground. She's super passionate about working with children and families. Maybe you can share with us a bit more about what you do.
I have my own mic. Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Sarima. I'm just an ordinary makcik. Makcik is auntie lah. You can find me at void decks running around the neighborhood. Right, why is it called Project Pencil? It's not that we sell pencils, okay? But it's just that pencil, we started off with a pencil providing stationeries and learning aids to countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, India. And since COVID struck, right, so we decided to focus more on the local children and the community, especially the elderlies. Yeah, we have experienced many challenges and sad encounters. For example, we do rough sleepers project. So we look up for rough sleepers in the community. So we even do things that MPs don't do. We comb the area at 2 a.m. while everyone is sleeping soundly. So we find a pregnant lady sleeping in a mosque toilet. And even in the community, there's an elderly who stayed on his own, and he passed on with no one by his side. And the neighbors only found out a week later. I think nobody has to pass on in such a way, lonely and, the body start to decompose. That's when the neighbors start to detect the foul odor. So that's when they call the police. So these are the things that wake me up, and I decide to gather the neighbors together. Hey, let's do something for our neighbors. So it's like a team of neighbors helping the neighbors, and I find that it's just very fulfilling, unpaid job, but it's so very satisfying because there are lonely people out there who they may not just need financial support, but just need your companionship, someone to talk to reminisce their past, and you can see their eyes glowing when you just sit down with them and have coffee. So Yeah, these are the things, the ground up, found out
Yes.
the groundwork
Yes.
that really encourage more volunteers to come and join us to do good things together.
Lovely. You are truly extraordinary, not just an ordinary makcik. Thank you, Madam Sarima, for sharing a little bit about the genesis, right? About how you started and why you started contributing to communities. We'll hear a lot more later as well. We'd like to invite Dr. Wong to give a little bit sharing, right, of how you guys brought health into the community with Yishun Health, I understand.
Yeah, so thanks. I just want to say first, Yishun, right? It's what they call the other country. When they want, you know, right, we kill cats. We really have a very bad reputation out there. And yet, right, we are here on this same stage of community. So it's like, we're there, but we're on the opposite end. So what's happening? So that's the first thing. The second thing is disclaimer. So I work for healthcare, but I think my organization thinks I'm a little bit of a misfit because I'm out there in the community all the time, but I'm not the community either. So Cormac has given me a good name to fit in for a very long while. I'm a gapper. I stand in between, and the view is great where I stand. And asset-based community development, I want to call out a note of thanks to Cormac and to Biling, who's in the audience here. She introduced Yishun Health to ABCD, and our journey has been so different as a result of that. Yeah, so thank you, Biling. So what is a professional and expert doing here? He's just said, right, no, we don't need you. Well, I would just say it's a full spectrum. If you need brain surgery, you want the best expert to tell you what to do and to do to you. That's a different setting, right? We're not talking about that setting. We are on the other side of it, yeah? Where none of us needing brain surgery here. We need change in our insights, our mindsets, right? Our paradigms. But this is where we all work together. And to be fair, there's no one community that can be replicated. So funders, if you want to scale, can you drop the word scale first? Because you cannot replicate communities. They are all different, and therefore local is the word, right? You need people like Madam Sarima, because she is really one of the centers that's holding the community together. Yeah, and brilliance on any one particular organization is not going to make it if we want communities to thrive. So we're in a different space. That's why gapping is important. I guess you might want to step in as a gapping philanthrope. Fist. Sorry. Okay, right. Okay. Then. I would like to say that currently, where we are in Singapore, there's this great divide, right? Family Service Center, where needs are being seen to. Everybody who's needy goes there. Nobody wants to be seen there, right? Because that's a place where, there's so much work. They need double the number of social workers. There's work to be done. And then on the other side, okay, I'm going to just say it. Probably going to be unpopular, active aging centers or community centers where there's a lot of activity. Wow, wonderful. Is it in any way of consequence to anyone? I give you a story. Amma goes to active aging center, and the people there think they need to entertain her. So they busy her with making flowers. Let's say that's for this week, making flowers. So they all make flowers. And then Amma comes back with the flower she made. That's really great, right? She achieved something. Then she gives to daughter and say, hey, I made this. Nice, right? And then daughter says, Ayah, Amma, can you don't bring back anymore? This is the 5th flower you have made. All the flowers are different. I cannot do anything. My house is full of things that you made. It's not appreciated, even though it came from her. So what is the consequence of that activity? And I want to highlight what Justin and his team did with some of y'all, right? You went to Scotland, and in a center where people were gathered together, they were repairing fishing nets for the people of Ukraine who were at war and did not have time to repair the nets. I think Justin can tell the story better, right? But honestly, that is of consequence to people. Yeah. So think again, right? On the one side, you're just doing things to people, lots of activity there. On the other side, there's a lot of activity being done, but there's no consequence to it. You know, why are we spending money here and here? Where is the community in all of this? And where is our sustainability going to be? Yeah. So I think we need to rethink our community spaces where people gather and what people can do in those spaces, right? So I'm going to say that health. What's health doing here? Yeah, I got that question quite a lot. And I will illustrate it just with a story. Yeah. So we started to look at how seniors would be falling down. And we said, oh, okay, worldwide, Otago exercises are really good for preventing falls, frailty, and yeah. So what did we do? We didn't go and say, we are going to have an Otago program out in the community. That's masking, right? So we worked with an arts company, Arts Vision, and we incorporated Otago exercises into a dance choreographed by them. And they trained the residents to be dance leaders. So it's not the artist who's exerting professionalism. It's not health that is projecting professionalism. It's the community leader that's doing that. So last week, I sat down in a wellness kampong with one of these dance leaders. She doesn't know who I am, so I sat down and she looked at me, you need to eat more. Then I said, oh yeah, well, but you know, I'm a bit old now, so I try to be very careful with what I eat. So I can't just bloat up sideways, so I don't eat more. Oh, then you must eat well. You must eat high value food. And then she went on to, you know what is high value food? The seniors are in Singapore, they don't eat enough protein. You need to get protein. You know what is good protein? Egg and milk. This woman was doing health coaching to me. She's a dance leader. She's doing health coaching. And I imagine she, being who she is, calling people to come for the dance sessions which she leads. She's reaching people I cannot even reach. I don't know even who they are. But she's the one reaching out to all these people and not just leading them in dance, she's also health coaching. Because she's doing that to me, she's doing that to everyone. That is what community building is about. Sustainability, the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah. The other one on disability. 2 days later, I was at the wellness kampong. And there was this young man who came in for a share a pot. And I think he's in his 30s. I don't know him well, but I was just observing. He walked like this. Okay? Quite clearly, he had I think, a stroke. A bead in the brain, probably a congenital aneurysm or something, and he survived. He's back in the, and on his other side, he was carrying his heavy knapsack, and he sat down, and one of the staff started to go and get a bowl of soup for him, and I said, no, don't do it. She looked at me and said, what? Don't do it? That's not nice. I said, just watch. So she said, okay. She watched. And 2 minutes later, one of the aunties went up to him and said, okay, come, you sit nearer the table. And she sit nearer to where the service of the bowls were and encourage him to go get his own bowl. Yeah? So he did that. He was sitting down, and the wellness kampong manager that was running the place, he sat down next to me and to this young man and he said, you know what? When he first came, all right, after he had been discharged from hospital, the first thing I did was to ask him, can you help me? I've got this remote control that I need the TV to be turned on for exercise. Can you turn it on for me every time there's an exercise program? This young man did that, and he started to come back again and again and again, doing something he could do with his good hand, right? He was contributing. He was adding value. And then the aunties giving him that encouragement were helping him to feel value. That's the beauty of community. And I think it needs to be discovered. All too often, we will go and mask by going in, doing good. Makes me feel so good. I'm so helpful. I'm such a savior. No. We need to get out. We need to let people do, and we need to discover their genius. And this is what you taught me. Yeah, and I think we can change Yishun to be, yes, the other country, but maybe a positive example. Yeah.
Yes, we could. Thank you, Dr. Wong. So what Sweet Fang was just mentioning, right, was about how we can place community at the center, right, of change, right, that they can be valued, that they have gifts to contribute, and people can actually be supported if they have a sense of belonging and ownership, right? And Sweet Fang was also mentioning about Allkin and some of the work that the other agencies do as well, which Cormac, I think you're quite familiar with, right? You have come and consulted with some of them and worked quite deeply with us as well over the years. Just want to hear your perspective on also what's the landscape of community development that you're seeing in Singapore, and how has it shifted as well over the years for you?
Thank you. It's lovely actually just listening to how grounded you all are. So the practice of featuring stories, because that's what features community, and that's something I've really appreciated. But I think there are dilemmas. So what we're talking about today is a contested idea. And it's contested in a lot of ways because I'm certainly no aficionado when it comes to the history of Singapore, so I'm not trying to say anything other than here's an innocent abroad and here's some observations. I've been coming here since 2013 on a pretty regular basis. And it seems to me that, when I first arrived, what I began to realize was special was the focus on place. The family resource centers, the idea of being intentional about the neighborhood as an important unit of change. But it was almost as if while that was there, at the same time, the space was becoming increasingly year on year more, and I please don't take this as a judgment, it's an observation. I'm very happy to be told I'm wrong. But my sense was that as I was coming and training, so I've trained, I think, in excess of about 1,200 people over the 10 years or so that I've been coming, more and more people would say, we want to work this way. We think our heritage, our origin story, our constitution says we should work this way, with citizens at the center, with nation building as the aspiration. However, the way success is measured, the way we're trained, the way we're told what to do, and the way we're rewarded and punished basically makes it so that we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. So we're saying community matters, place matters, work in this way at one level, and then everything is measured on the basis of professional, programmatic, choreographed interventions are what are going to be rewarded and keep you out of trouble. And risk aversion is more a virtue than intelligent risk-taking and transformation. And every so often we pepper in nice words like innovation, right? So when you hear in excess of 1,000 people saying, we desperately want to work this way, we're overwhelmed, we can name aunties and uncles in the community that are doing this anyway, and what we would love to be able to do is to apply this approach, then I think what we're facing is a dilemma where you have a very significant measure of citizens in one way, wanting and already doing this. You've also got a growing body of people, I think, who do not think of themselves as citizens anymore, who think of themselves as private. So a lot of their lives have become privatized, and they think of themselves as consumers, whether they're happy or unhappy, but as consumers. I consume services. So I think it may be that is a real worry, certainly for me and my values. And I think many of the people who are fronting up and convening this conversation, I think they care about that. And they recognize that if you take the client hat off people, they want to contribute. People want to get involved, but they have to be invited in and supported. The other worry I have is if you've got such an incredible body of practitioners who are feeling frustrated, they're feeling they have to work almost against their own muscle memory as practitioners, then I think that's a huge loss of social capital. And so the challenge really is, I think, with donors, with policymakers, of course it's with citizens and practitioners as well, but I think we need to really think about that piece around the gap. So if we have a situation where we have a lot of policymakers saying, story one, that's the story we want all of our practitioners and all of our citizens to buy into. Well, I guarantee you what's going to happen is you're going to burn out your practitioners and you're going to turn citizens into clients. And in 20 years' time, when you celebrate what you celebrated this weekend, it will look substantively and feel substantively different. Right? That's the challenge. And so it seems like, the way to address that is to actually lean into this great body of practitioners and free them up, and maybe sometimes challenge the ones that have, gotten comfortable with the clientelistic way of working. But more importantly, to recognize citizens are waiting. They're waiting for the space to be created. They're waiting to be believed in. They're not even looking for capacity building a lot of time, just a little bit. But what they're looking for is space. And if the whole narrative is, what can I do to you and for you? And we're not actually asking the question, well, can this person do things for themselves, like get the bowl of soup or whatever it might be, then we're really missing a trick. I hope that's not overly negative.
No, I think you alluded to the challenges in practice as well, right? The dilemmas that do come with it. And to borrow a quote from Sherry Arnstein, who I actually respect very much, she says that this idea of citizen participation is a little like eating spinach. No one is against it in principle because it is good for you. Right? And sometimes that's what ABCD feels like. I don't think anyone's going to say that, having people step up, having people tap on what's strong, tapping on their gifts is bad, right? Everyone can agree in principle. But the challenge is, as you mentioned, there are dilemmas when it comes to practicing it, right? I'm really curious and would like to hear from the panelists as well, right? For you guys, even in the social front, in the health front, and even for you, Madam Sarima, right? What was it like? What lessons have you learned actually in applying this in practice? How was it like for you?
Okay, so this dilemma is very real. I think in the context of a family service center, I think most of our staffing are still social workers. So we do come with a certain set of training, a certain set of perspective that is very much focused on the control function. So at the same time, when we are trying to introduce the idea about community development, where we are focusing a lot on strength-based, a lot about what's possible, I think this, in terms of the change in mental model, is something that, as a center, that we have to grapple with. Right? So, and not just among the professionals, it's also even among the families that we serve, that when they come to us, when they step into a family service center, the first thing that they are expecting is, I'm here to seek help. Why are you telling me that I can contribute? So how do we make sense about community development as a language, as a perspective? How do we interpret it for our families that we serve, for our colleagues, and even for our management, for our funders, our donors as well? So I think this is a constant process that I'm still working on. So some of the example about what I have tried in Yishun is that firstly, we split our whole of our Yishun into a few sectors. So we use a constituency model where we have a groups of social workers focusing on one particular area like Chong Pang, and another set of social workers focusing on Nee Soon East. So in the past, our teams of 40 social workers will be spread across the whole of Yishun, which is a relatively big town. So they will be spread across, and they spend lots of time going to home visits, doing things on the ground. But their vested interest in developing a specific place is very limited because their cases are all over Yishun. So what we did is we cut Yishun into a smaller pie. So right now, in one of the rental blocks in this particular zone, let's say Chong Pang, in the past, we might have 40 workers taking 2 cases each, total 80 cases. But right now, I split it into half. I have 20 social workers taking 4 cases each, which is the same number of cases. But the vested interest of the worker to own their space just increased, just because of a structural change. So with this structural change, it helps the worker to also be able to recognize the benefits of community development work. Then the next part about our work with our residents, our families, it also need to change. So in the past, when we do our home visit, our house visits, we'll go to the door, we'll knock on the door. Hey, hi, I'm from Yishun Family Service Center. I'm here to do assets mapping. I want to know what are your strengths. So we went to the rental blocks. Our resident returned a blank look to us. What strength are you talking about? I'm staying in a rental flat. Can't you tell that I'm staying in a rental flat? So the caseworker, the social workers, that they came back, they will just tell me, hey, Xingwei is getting nowhere. We are not getting any good results. So that's when then we changed the way that we play our game. Instead of going out there to do needs assessment, strength assessment, we focus a lot on building relationship. We spend time. So, we have a lot of donors who likes to organize excursion for our family. So they will come, CSR, doing excursion. We leverage on that. But instead of bringing excursion open up for all our cases, we, for example, let's say go to the zoo, I just limit it to a few specific blocks. Yeah, so it could just between these 5 blocks, my excursion to the zoo is just for these 5 blocks. The family don't have to know it, but at the back of our mind is that when they go for this excursion, this very informal setting, they are actually bumping into neighbors that they would have otherwise met in the community, in the lift, in the lobby, etc. So through this period when we build relationship first, after a while, we do have a few members that comes up and say that, hey, there's something that they can contribute. I think very recently, we together with Majority Trust, we supported one of our residents who have been doing meal distribution to the residents for a longest time. And recently, he came to us and told us that, hey, he needs a community fridge. So during one of the CSR effort that we partner with Majority Trust, this resident voiced out his request, saying, I need a fridge so that I can do more for residents. And one of the participants actually volunteered and says that, okay, I will buy you a fridge. So immediately wrote a check, sent the fridge down. It was so fast, before even the approval from the town council is given. It just happened in so fast. Yeah, so I think we have to do a lot in terms of changing the mental model for the team, for our clients, for our families. How do they see themselves? Then lastly is also internally with our management, with our donor, how do we interpret evaluation results? So when we look at program evaluation from a very typical social work point of view, is that we want to see deficit becoming strength. We want to find problems. The more problems we solve, the more effective is the program. So we have to really try to switch the mental model into such a way that actually we are not really looking for problems. We are not looking for deficits. We are looking for strength and how can we find ways to amplify it. But internally, from an evaluation point of view, we might be, from a very traditional mindset, we might be wondering, but these are strengths really. I thought it's really good for the residents to be doing all this. Why are you still putting in more funds? You're still need to amplify. Why are you trying to make things bigger? Are you trying to make things do more for the sake of doing? But I think it's really a lot about changing the mindset, the perspective that we relate towards all this work. And it's easier said than done. I think when we talk about change of values, change of belief, it's really a process that constantly we need to have conversations over the years to really amplify this piece of work. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Singwei, for sharing. And what struck me as you were mentioning is that even as professionals, we shift in our postures and our positions. Community members will also start to experience ourselves differently, right? Because sometimes maybe the members that you actually work with see themselves as consumers of service, right? And that change will take time, right? But it's also for us to be able to lead that and be able to influence positively. And I think you also alluded to how to redefine scale, right? And I think that's a question and conversation that Sweet Fang was also mentioning. How do we view scalability not just in more, bigger, right? But perhaps in the depth of the relationships and even in proliferating in small little different efforts, right? Sweet Fang, wondering if this connects with some of the things that you have been thinking about.
Yeah, it does. Measurements do frustrate us. Yeah. Okay, I think the only thing that I would say about measurements, we do need measurements. I agree. Yeah, because we won't know if we don't measure. Oh, sorry, yeah, she reminded me to do that. Okay, so the issue about measurements is it becomes just measurable for impact, and it's called a KPI. So what do we want out of something? There can be so many things we can want out of doing something. For example, just learning. Learning as an outcome is so undervalued. I'm grateful for some of the funders who have helped me, and they've only asked, can we learn something of this? And can we spread our learning? How do I measure learning? I couldn't, yeah. But I think that was the leeway they gave me, in terms of putting into place something. When you want something that is, what do you call it, consolidated into a number. So let's say, right, 80% of families improve in their social mobility. There's no granularity. Who exactly? There will be losers, there will be great winners, and everybody is just averaged out. That's what you're getting if you are measuring numbers. Then, of course, if you say, yeah, tell story. How many stories we need? Thousands, right? To be able to get that same value as a measured number. But when you think about translating that to a person who is on the ground, meeting families, connectors, right? If I were to make a difference for every interaction that I do, surely that has to add to the numbers in total, right? So when we see funding, right, do we see funding as we are funding a finite game? From this year, I give you do this, right? Your intervention is here. You do a pre-intervention baseline, and then you measure what happens after 3 to 5 years, let's say, right? And then 3 to 5 years later, nothing happens, right? It's got to go kaput. But where is the big game? What is in it for Singapore? What is SG 100 going to look like? If we are all funding small games consecutively, one after another, and no one is stepping on each other's shoulders, we are losing all our learnings. Yeah, and that granularity is what makes the connection when the people are on the ground, meeting people, that powerful story. A lot of people are saying, I want more of that. Can we have more of that? We have more of that, we are going to get precipitation, proliferation, yeah, not scale. Not identical copies of Yishun elsewhere, or else nobody wants to be a Yishun elsewhere, right? Yeah, we don't want replicated Yishuns elsewhere. We want Bedok to be Bedok. We want McPherson to be McPherson. Every space is different, and that is mushrooming out, right? I got my famous story of Yuan scale, very, very popular in Singapore is the Great White Shark Theory. One project, you get these big people with big names come in, create a flagship program. All money go into that, but sharks eat everything else. It exists as a loner. We do need some great white sharks in Singapore. This kind of big flagship projects. But there are alternatives, right? There's the school of fish, right? Everybody does the same thing. They group together as big as a shark, but you have it in smaller groups. Franchising is one of them. But the one that I really love is the coral reef. What does a funder do to create a coral reef? All you need to do is to put in a frame. Guess what? The community will come. The pink coral, the green coral, everybody will come. If one group gets too big, what happens? Hey, mind yourself. I also have a right to be here, and I contribute to you, you contribute to me. They grow in equilibrium to each other, and what a sight. So beautiful. Many different people coming together, doing things that they are the best in, protecting each one, yet providing an impetus for growth for each one. So what does a funder do after that? Nothing, right? They're doing it themselves. The coral is doing it themselves. So all you have to do is put a frame somewhere else. Yeah? So that's where I see the beauty of letting the community grow themselves if you just know where to put some of, your funding in. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so the reminder that community solutions can grow to the size as much as it's needed. That it doesn't need to be huge or big or there needs to be a monopoly. It can grow to a size that is needed and fit for purpose, right? And I'm also reminded of the story of the community fridge, which I think, Madam Sarima, I think you want to share a little bit more because actually there were some collaborations that came about as a result of that quite magically.
Right. There are actually more love stories in Yishun than the horror stories, if you look deeper. So I'm here to share the love stories. Yeah, recently we came together with the Family Service Center and together with TMT, Majority Trust, and also the Children's Society. So we came out with this team, a new team called One Yishun. And through this collaboration, we managed to provide more vegetables, doing food rescue to provide to the communities, the neighbors. So instead of the vegetables, fruits, which are just for cosmetic defects, you want to throw. Instead of them ending up in bins, the bins, we end up feeding our hungry neighbors. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. I mean, why throw when you can eat them, right? And nowadays, vegetables are also very expensive. Also, there are other challenges in Yishun, especially space. We have Project Pencil is now championing about 50 students, 50 kids in Yishun, and we provide free tuition program, academic support, and also sports mentoring in Silat. So these children are actually representative. They are Singapore athletes. They will one day represent Singapore in international competition. So they are our future champs. So that is how we work here. We nurture them. We pollinate their young hearts. We tell them they are our valuable assets. They are important to us. So they are going to be the change makers. We not only give them fish, but we also teach them to fish. And not only we help these champs, but we also help the families. So together, we uplift them using an upstreaming approach, and we're going to end up harvesting love. So there's going to be more beautiful flowers blooming in Yishun, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam.
So, let's come together, join us, because when we care enough and when we are sharing enough, no one has to go hungry or homeless.
Yeah, Thank you, Madam Sarima, for that, really. And I've been in Yishun, right? And all of us have seen the work that Madam Sarima does. So while there are services that are present, it's really that deep relationships that she already has existing with the children and the families, that she's able to connect them, right, to what's existing in the community, some of the resources if we do need, right? So that relationship and that trust, right, that is built over time, it's not something that can be replicated by just another service. So really, really kudos to the work
That's
that you
right,
do.
Min Fang. You know, apart from this food insecurity, right? Like I said, the space, when we want to start our project, right, what we did was we couldn't find a proper space. So what we did, the volunteers, we find a corner, a void deck. Actually, it was on a mezzanine level.
Yeah.
So we all like Karangoni, ni. Karangoni auntie. We brought in chairs that people want to throw, bookshelves. So we created a small, cozy study corner, like also a mini library. Not only the students came, even the elderly that stayed in that block came to have a good read, reading the books, sharing stories with the children. So the whole community came alive and it really enhanced the living, and that is very beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. In the future, maybe we can share as well and bring you guys into the community. But I'm also conscious of time, right? So actually, we can just round up and maybe get one comment from each of us, right? What can funders, right, or us in the room do that can be actually helpful, right, to practitioners and community members like yourself? What is one thing that could be done that is helpful? Yeah. We can invite each of you to share.
Yeah, great, because I think that's the key issue. So people have come here this morning, and you probably are sold on the why, largely. But the question is, what can I do, right? As a funder, as a donor, as a policymaker. So to cut to the chase on that, there are a number of things you can do. And I think one of the first things to do is ask the uncomfortable question. How many aunties and uncles are my programs currently displacing, despite my best intent? And actually evaluate yourselves. So turn your critical lens back on yourself and don't assume you can only do good. I mean, the Gates Foundation spending billions in Africa. The World Bank are too. In many cases, they're displacing people. They're damaging communities, but that isn't counted. There's no KPI to say, what harm have you done? Introduce it. Hold yourselves to account. Hold your staff to account. Hold your food chain to account. I think that's the first thing. The second is recognize that you have immense leverage. So how you invite people to think about themselves in communities is in your hands. You could start with a needs assessment, but I guarantee you the only thing that needs assessment is needs assessment. If you're starting there, what you're asking people to do is focus on what they don't have. Start your analysis with what people do have and what they desire. What do you care about enough to act upon, and how can we be of service to you? How can we fit in and be useful? And that may mean them turning around and saying, get out of the way. You're blocking us. But really taking a listening ear, giving communities a good listening to, I think is key. The Kellogg's Foundation back in 1993 did that. They changed all of their needs assessment forms into asset maps. Literally, to make an application to the Kellogg's Foundation, you had to actually do an asset map. You had to find out what in the community was there already. And it makes so much sense. How can we know what a community needs until they know what they have? So that's within your hands. Another thing you can do is you can use matching fund schemes. Really small amounts of money that drive past institutions and drive into the hands of local people who maybe just want tea and biscuit money or enough money to buy the stand or whatever it might be. But actually using a matching fund scheme like in Seattle, where you're saying to people, we're going to start with the ideas you have, and we're going to value every hour you pledge at 15 Sing dollars. So you're not coming with cap in hand, you're coming with equity, and we're going to match your equity as co-investors in the future. So there are two things. Start with an asset map, shape how you actually ask your questions that way, and two, look at match funding and give people themselves the worth and the dignity and the value of saying, you are primary investors in your future. Tell us what you want, and then we'll back you. So there are two thoughts. I have others, but we can do that during Q&A.
think this works. Yes, yes, okay. All right, I'm going to say look out for the emergent measures, or what's emergent. So we are not living in a simple or even complicated world anymore. In the community, it's messy. The technical word for that is complex. Yeah. And so when we do something with them, we let them do something, we think we are doing something to them, but that changes us. So effect is bidirectional. It is not a linear one direction I do to you. What I do to people, they will change, and that will change everything else again. It's very important to stay in inquiry and observe these emergent patterns that are coming out in community. And I think that's where I would say the best thing is stay in inquiry to really know what is important to watch out for. It may not be measurable, but it's definitely going to be identifiable. So that's one. And the other thing is, honestly, actually, the best community building work doesn't need money. I've done a lot of things without funding, and people are still wondering, how did she do that? Honestly, there was one time, I think the Masik Foundation is here. There was one time somebody came with the Masik Foundation and told them, you have to help her, you know, because she's very poor. And I stood up and I said, excuse you, community is not poor. It's very rich. We do have a cash flow problem sometimes, but community has got assets that are not money tagged. Yeah. So I think we are very used to buying things, being consumers, clients, and that's why we always translate, right, resources first thing, money. Yeah. Sometimes your presence, your support, your backup to a group, it's the most important asset you can give to them. Just to know that there's somebody supporting their work. Yeah. Test. Okay. This one works. Okay, I kind of agree. I really agree with you, Dr. Wong, because what the world really needs today is not just kashing. I mean, really, we need lots and lots of love. Love is pure, love is cure. And let us all touch our hearts today and ask ourselves what we can do today for a better tomorrow. I think only with love we'll be fueled to do more meaningful things in this world. And where there is love, there is community. And where there is a community, there should be love. Love is everything. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so for me, I'm going to take a slightly different track. I think money is still important.
Thank you for the honesty.
Okay, so I think money is still important. But so what I'm asking for will be two things. First is flexibility. I think flexibility in how the funds is going to be deployed. I think one of the experience I had was initially when we have some funds. We will craft it to a very fixed set of outcome measures, a very fixed set of expectation. But when we work with communities, magic happen. Unexpected things do happen. So I think if let's say we can have space for a certain level of flexibility in what are some of the unintended outcome, good outcome that shows up, I thought that will be very helpful. But yet at the same time, we might also want to have certain manage our expectation. There might be some unintended negative outcome that comes up. So how do we have space to really look at, to evaluate the program? And flexibility is also in terms of who we use the funding for. I think typically funding has always been used on program costs when we focus on activities, etc. But I think over times we realize that fundings are needed to staff the community worker, to pay the connectors, or even to pay the residents themselves who might be doing very important work. That without them, like Dr. Wong mentioned earlier, that some of them do face a cash flow problem. So how can we have some forms of funding to tide them through certain challenge when they are tight on terms of cash flowing? So that's the flexibility part. And next is about time. To me, the fundamental part about community building is building relationship. And I believe that I experienced that building relationship takes time. It takes time, and sometimes it might be hard to quantify how much time needed for this relationship to be built. Yeah, for some of us, maybe we got to know our spouse in like 3 months, 6 months. But for me, probably I spent like 5 years to go after my wife, things like that. So in terms of time, it could be different. There could be different time point. And so how can we put this as part of our consideration when we think about the project that we are funding? So flexibility and time, and I think money is still important. Yeah.
Can I just try and parse that out a little bit, because I think conceptually it's really important. So it's not actually a binary conversation. It's not either or. It's how it's done. And if it's done badly, it is absolutely counterproductive. So there's a watershed past which the way and the amount can be really harmful to social capital. So just examples are helpful here. So just really quickly, I'll give you 2 examples. So one city I worked in, Leeds, same problem as you were describing, right? So their social workers would go in and work on issues and work with target groups. One of the issues was people who couldn't afford elder care. Family support wasn't there, and so they were essentially being channeled into congregated care settings they didn't want to be. To your point around love, there was no love there. And where there's no love, put love in, right? But if you're a system, how do you do that? Well, one of the ways you can do that is stop causing the problem. So what they began to realize is, and this is true to this day, it costs, in the UK, it costs Leeds' social care budget £48,000 to put one person into a congregate care setting. If all you're doing is thinking, I work with individuals, you can't see any possibilities except to do what you can do or else save money. That's the conversation. But if you see the arena of change differently, this person lives in a neighborhood, they're currently disconnected. How about we make that the problem and figure out how we can connect that person, if at all possible, meaningfully into the neighborhood so they're missed on the days they don't show up to activities, as a participant, as a contributor, as well as somebody in a reciprocal relationship. Now, to employ a community builder who helps gently support those community nodes, costs about 30,000, and that's tea and biscuit and walking around money included. On average, we know that in each neighborhood you do that, 10 people who would have otherwise, using the old Story 1 model, gone into congregate care, that's $480,000 or pounds. And for a fraction of that, you can keep those people out of a setting they don't want to be in, and more importantly, you can keep them joyously connected. Now, obviously money is needed there, but it's an imagination around how the money... So the big problem, I think, is that money is stuck in the acute end of the system. And if we freed it up to even invest wisely in a set of appropriately animating resources, we might go somewhere. The other thing, just briefly say, is having the control within the community so that they own their own budgets. Where did credit unions come from? Credit unions came from families who weren't actually being given finance by banks. So they created their own. They pooled their own resource, and they created, affordable credit. Where are families going to get the money to retrofit their homes, to deal with the reality that's coming down the pipe in terms of climate change? Well, these are some of the questions I think, in terms of Sing 100, we should be thinking about now. I'm sure you already are. But that's about money, to your point. So I think money is important, but who owns it and how it's actually dispersed is the key issue in my mind.
Thank you for that. So just to quickly summarize what the panel had also mentioned, right? That enabling community and spaces where communities can thrive requires more than just financial support. It's enabling conditions, it's the people, it's supporting flexibility, it's enabling time, it's giving space for all of these to thrive, right? That is more than just funding, although critical to some degree as well. So with that, I would like to thank the panel. Join me in giving them a round of applause, please. Right, so for this next segment, we'll be having a quick Q&A. So on the screen, you will see this Mentimeter code. You can scan it and just put your questions in, or we would like to also invite questions from the floor. Okay. So we've got our team member that will go around with a microphone. If anyone has a question, can you just put up your hand and we'll call upon you. Yes, at the back, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Pel. I'm from Allkin, Singapore. Thanks so much, speakers, for the enlightening conversation in the morning. The stories were really heartwarming for me to hear. My question is more specifically for Madam Sarima, and also I guess the speakers can chime in as well. I assume that Project Pencil is collaborating with some institutions. Can you share with us to what extent is the collaboration with institutions versus citizens, like locals, neighbors? What is the balance like? And also, is it an aspiration for Project Pencil to deinstitutionalize? That means to be solely running by neighbors in association with each other. Because I assume that for sustainable change to happen in some ways, it has to be run by an interdependent community, right? That is not solely dependent on institutions or funders for backing. Yeah, so those are the two parts of my question. Thank you.
So the questions for Madam Sarima, just to break it down, the first part, right, is how much of it do you work with services, right? So for example, the FSC, Yishun Health, or Tzu Chi Humanistic Youth Center versus working with the auntie, uncle lah, in the block and the children. Yeah.
Okay, it's a very challenging practice to work on the ground because we work with real problems, with real people. So it's a good balance that we, together, we collaborate with agencies and institutions because we are not funded. So we heavily depends on sponsorship. So when people come to sponsor us, for example, healthy food pack for the children, that is really meaningful to us because on our own, we are unable to provide such gifts for the children and the families. So we're looking forward to working with, to collaborate with more agencies. And of course, on our own, the Makcik Pakcik, we are more focused on giving immediate help. Let's say middle of the night, someone fell sick, they need to bring them to the hospital, so we will come to we will assist them, call the ambulance for them, or even in the afternoon, a mom wants to fry an egg for the child who's hungry, no cooking all, so we just come to the rescue immediately. So no need to line up at SSO, only to be rejected because you need to come back for the food ration maybe tomorrow. So the child is still hungry. So they are immediate needs. And secondly, yes, we do need expertise to come on board. It is not easy to work with a set of uncle, aunties. We need professional help, especially in administration, social media, because with that set of skills, we can go further, we can help more people, we can reach out to more groups in the community. Yeah.
Lovely. So what I'm hearing is that you play to your strengths, right? The strength of institutions is the ability to navigate systems, right? Be able to communicate across, right? But the strength of the community is in perhaps the agility, right? That you're able to be responsive, to be there in the moment. And I hear that is a balance that you feel is a good mix for both. Hope that answers your question, Pel. Yeah, before we take your question, I see one comment, right? It says, how do funders find more Makcik Sarima? So I think that's alluding also to, to what Sarima was mentioning, right? and playing to the strengths of community. We have two questions. I think your hand went up first. Maybe we'll take Nigel's question and then your question, Lawrence.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Nigel. I'm a resident of Queenstown, trying to catalyze change. And actually, my question is quite related to the question that you just mentioned.
Right.
So to the panelists, it's like, how do you activate residents within a neighborhood context, place-based, as Dr. Wong mentioned, to rise up and contribute to that neighborhood? And we're talking about not the people with needs, we're talking about comfortable people who may not, well, that they don't need anything from community services and so on. And they may be like closet community builders. How do you get them out of the closet? Yeah.
All right, thank you. Maybe we can just get your question and then we can answer them together as well.
Thanks. I've been I guess, advocate for ABCD since 2010. Although I must credit Wheeling for introducing the concept to me more than 20 years ago. But I never really got it until I went to a community. I went to see Dudley Street neighborhood initiative in Boston. It blew my mind how this could be put in practice. And it also blew my mind when I could spend an hour in Evanston with Jody Kretzmann, who was one of the co-founders of this concept. And I asked Jody, this is so intuitive. I mean, this is so obvious. Why is it not practiced more? And he said to me, this was in 2010, the key reason why we still go with the old approach is that people, and he was meaning particularly politicians, want to be heroes. They want people to depend on them because then they can elect it. So a question for Cormac is that, I mean, this is still, I mean, it's not just, I'm not just talking about Singapore, this is around the world, right? Politicians want to be heroes, they want to be seen to be doing things for people, stuck in that quadrant. So how do you create that narrative that you can shift, you can win, even if you do it with and by and promote doing things by people? So that's question one. The other question is more, I guess, for all, particularly those working on the ground. I mean, I've seen ABCD being, I mean, it's great because at first I was talking about it, then I saw it being done on the ground. But sometimes it just comes across as a checklist approach. You know, it's, I've done it, and then it's like, what do you actually do? And it's still very much who's doing the asset mapping? The professionals. Who's doing the connections? The professionals. Who's doing the execution? The professionals. So it's still very much stuck in the four, people quadrant. Sometimes it's with people, but it hasn't evolved in a lot of cases. It just gets stuck. So how do you work with professionals? Say, yeah, you say you get it, you say you do it, but you're actually not really doing it. How do you evolve, I guess, the practice in the community?
Thank you to both questions. So just as a quick summary, right? So Nigel's questions was around how can funders or how can we actually activate more in the community to participate, right? To be able to support and build communities. And Lawrence's question is around how do we step back, right? Because there's this innate desire to do two or four naturally. Maybe we can, Cormac, you want to take the second question first?
So a story, and it integrates, I think, both questions, which are excellent and very grounding. A number of years ago, this is going back maybe 10 years ago now, I remember being in a conversation with a group of professionals and residents related to a community in Birmingham, Hodge Hill. And the whole narrative, it had just been covered in the local papers, and the description of the community was it was the third most work-shy neighbourhood in Britain. Not a great reputation to have. And so people were upset, but didn't really have a sense of how we were going to respond to that. Then we had faith leaders in the room, and they were wonderful, and we had health people and whatever. And each of the professionals sequentially said, how can I bring health to this community? How can I bring God or whatever to this community? How can I bring, peace to this community? How can I bring money to this community? And in each instance, we had to say, well, first of all, those questions are the problem. You've been asking those questions for decades. How's it working out for you? And everybody, oh, not so good. How's it working out for the community? Not so good. So the invitation to actually have a different conversation, one that says we recognize that we've been overreaching institutionally, and we recognize that civically we have retreated. So our citizens are in retreat, and our professionals are ever in advance at the speed of burnout. It's completely unsustainable. But what's sustaining it is the addiction to the story. And it is a story about rescue, about being hero rather than being host. So, I mean, who wants to fail at being God, right? Who wants to fail at being a Messiah? But that's part of what our challenge is if we are public servants. We're the sidekicks, not the heroes. So we've got professionals who are acting like Batman instead of Robin. They're the caddies, not the golfers. And this is part of the problem. Citizens are defined by their role as the people who do whatever's left to be done after the great hero professional comes in and fixes the problem. And somehow, as citizens, we've talked ourselves as much into that corner as we've been pushed into it. So activation is about deactivating that story. And actually, the good news is there are some things we can do to begin that, and they're quite humble, modest, and doable. And one of the first things to recognize is that in every single community, there are people who haven't drank that Kool-Aid. And I call them connectors. It's really interesting how so often people who want to help communities, the first thing they look for is leaders. And often what they're trying to do is get the leaders to recruit clients for their services. And actually a lot of philanthropists give them the money to do that. So it's a recruitment drive to turn people into clients, which is the opposite of what you're asking. So the first thing is do no harm. Before we start activating, stop deactivating. Right? That is within our control, but it's going to take a huge amount. Call it training, call it whatever, mentoring, but it's going to take a huge amount of disintermediating, to use your excellent term, in terms of design thinking. We've got to design into the practice of people the understanding that your job is not to get up and get the bowl. Your job is to not displace Auntie and to support Auntie to not become his mammy, but to support him to actually be somebody who is active and capable. And that has to cascade. That conversation is going to take time. You know, so one of the things I think that's really key is there are people in this room who have it within their gift to get beside 17 to 20 different communities in the neighborhood and say, we will commit to be in solidarity with you for the next 10 years. We don't know what activation needs to look like. It's going to be different everywhere. But let's start the conversation, and we will be alongside you. We will companion, and you will teach us how to be useful and how to fit in and how to step back when we need to, because we don't know how to do this. We've been providing rather than precipitating for years. So let's go on a learning journey together. So I think the key thing is deactivate, right? Learn to step back a little bit, but don't abandon, and really move into that discovery posture and away from the delivery posture. And actually admit that we don't have the answers. Admit that we're not going to rescue. And that takes a huge amount of courage. One of the big challenges, just briefly say, one of the big challenges, I think, to go back to the story that I started the comments with in Birmingham, was that I think people in the delivery mode were really frightened, actually. It wasn't technically hard to do what we were talking about, but they were frightened because they were moving into a world that was illegible to them, that they couldn't control, that they, you know, from a risk aversion point of view, they were worrying legitimately about things like safeguarding. Well, what happens if somebody is abused or somebody is harmed? So all of those questions started to surface, and they had to be worked through. But also within the community, if you go back to the story, there's 5,000 people living in that neighborhood, many of whom have never had conversations with each other. You know, so we began the process of actually just enabling them to have conversations. And it didn't start with an asset map. It started with like the relationships, and then beginning the conversation. What do you care about enough to take action on here? And I guarantee you there's lots and lots of people in every neighborhood who care about something. It may take time, But eventually you start finding those connectors who say, I'm worried about the fact there's nothing for my daughter to do. And if you're doing your work well, and you're in relationship with people, and you've listened on the trip to the zoo or whatever, you know 5 other mothers and 2 fathers and 3 aunts who are willing to have that conversation. And if you're really clever, you'll bring the young people into that conversation as well. And you'll shift it from a me, isolated, frightened conversation to a we, and we can do this. And then maybe someday the kids will say, let's organize a summer program together. We don't need any resource, we're going to do it together. But we have resource because there's people in the neighborhood who know how to braid, who know how to cook. We've got aunties that we'd like to learn stuff from, and maybe we'd like to teach them stuff too. So we'll organize our own summer program. And I guarantee you for the next 10 years, in that same neighborhood, there'll be a philanthropist who funds that piece of work. And at the exact same time, there'll be a philanthropist who will fund 12 young people to go off on a trip where they will get therapy, and they'll get leadership, and they'll get a professional intervention. Measure the 2 outcomes. Watch what happens. It's a 2-horse race. I guarantee you in the long term, the kids who've learned to grow and connect in their own neighborhood will have more choice and more empowerment and more confidence to be citizens than the second group. I don't know if that picks up the 2 questions.
Yeah, I did want to respond to say that activation is not something you do. So your question of how do we activate, it's already what is my role to activate, right? Yeah, so the questions that we ask are very important, and the language that we use is very important. So a very good distinction that Cormac taught me is how am I useful, not helpful. That made a whole lot of difference for me, because I used to hate the word being used. I thought that's bad, yeah. But then if I'm useful, I take myself out of it. I am decentered. And this is what is happening in a lot of professional fields, right? If you want to work in community, you need to decenter the professional, whether it's an artist, the medical, an engineer, decenter that, because really the community is what you are building. Not the art, not the medicine, not any of that. Yeah? So decentering is one of them. In my very inelegant word, I used to say demedicalized care. Yeah, and of course the doctors didn't like that, coming from a doctor myself, right? So, but I think it's really about decentering professionalism and knowing that actually people have it within them. I give you another example. In the hospital, when someone's diabetes is poorly controlled, what do? We start insulin. We do to them. One GP came in and saw, oh my goodness, you just start insulin like that. I have to ask permission from my patient whether I can start insulin with him. It's like, how can you just do this to people? I was like, oh my goodness. They don't do that in community, they ask them. But I saw even better in Mayo Clinic when they actually bring the patient into their own care. You have this problem, there's insulin, but there's this whole other group of medication. This one is going to be painful. This one needs injectables and stuff. This one will make you fat. And you know what? Different people were choosing different treatments, and they were making grounded decisions for themselves because we gave them that capability to understand what they want best. So the young women never chose insulin, not because they didn't want to give insulin, right? They didn't want to get fat. That was their biggest concern. And it's like, to a doctor, right? Fat, well, yeah, that's secondary. Your health is of primary importance. That's not true in real life. Health is really deprioritized in real life because they want to look good, they want to feel good about themselves, they want to live a life. They don't want to have perfect medical control, which is what doctors want. So you see, our intention when we are trying to be helpful is so different from their aspirations, and we need to ask them, If we don't ask them, we do not know. And I think that's where the other part about activating, right? So we have a story. Sports SG wanted to start a swimming exercise in the community. They approached us, and Yvonne, she's sitting there, she said, how about you talk to the aunties? So she gathered a group of aunties to talk to this big Sports SG. They got on very well. They started. And we were away in the UK when she got this WhatsApp from, we started the first session, right? And you know what was the only question they asked her? Her expertise. Where can we buy swimming costume for old people like us? So they can do it. We don't need to step in and do it for them. We don't need to be helpful. Yeah, we just introduce and get them to come together. Yeah, and that's where Makcik comes in. Yeah, for Share a Pot. The majority of times when we start a Share a Pot, a lot of the people we ask, would you like to contribute? You know what they will say? I never held a job in my life, you know. I never cooked for other people. I only cook for my own family. You're exactly the talent that we need. Because you cook for people whom you love. And now, if you're cooking for more people with that same love, you get Share a Pot. Yeah, so we're not asking for leaders with special talent here. No Batmans, no even Robins needed, right? We need ordinary people stepping up. And that's activation. Just stepping up. That's activation. So I think ask community.
Thank you. Sorry, I do know we have many questions, but there is one really interesting one that I wanted to highlight from the Mentimeter. So it goes, those in power may worry when communities are to self-mobilize and have agendas that may be counter to their own, and therefore support or grant permission to only the people that they trust. So are authorities wrong to worry? And there's another affiliated question that says, how do we let it go? What if something goes wrong? Right? And this is a conversation about power, right? And I think it's quite important to unpack.
Well, yeah, and it's also a conversation around what kind of country you want to live in. So, you know, people in authority are also citizens. And hopefully citizens first. So really, the question in my mind, regardless of wherever you find yourself, is, do I want to live in a democracy or do I want to live in a technocracy? And even if you're in authority now, just the nature of the life course is eventually you will become dependent on those technocrats. And they're coming for you. You know, so you will face that moment where somebody in a white coat has something in mind for you that you don't have in mind. So it is almost a very personal question. Do I want to live in a context where my role, my choice, and my citizenship is defined as secondary to the role of those that are assumed to be the authority? Or are they in service of us as citizens? Now, I've read your Constitution, and my understanding very clearly is the latter is the answer, constitutionally, in this country. But it's one thing to have it in writing, and it's quite another to live it in practice. So I think, you know, the constitutional calling of your country, the nation building, is everybody has something to contribute. Everybody can be a citizen here. And you know you're in the presence of a citizen because three things are happening. They're defining with their neighbours the things they care about and they're prepared to act upon. Number one. They define the way in which it makes best sense in that given situation to act collectively. And that might seem weird and messy, and mostly it does, but it works. And the third thing is, and I think this is really, really key, they're implementing it. So if you live in a country where crime is the issue, police will be the key actors. If you live in a country where peace is the key issue, community will be the key actors. If you live in a country where sickness is the key issue, doctors will be the key actors. If you live in a country where well-being and democracy are the key issues, citizens and communities will be the key actors. So my answer is simple: read your constitution.
Yeah, maybe I can also weigh in from a FSC point of view. I think when we look at managing risks about power, I think it depends on the context. Like what is the situation? What is the issue that we're talking about? So for example, during COVID, we were actually giving out ART kits to our residents staying in the rental flats. So we were being issued a lot of ART kits, and one way for us to disperse it is actually for the caseworkers to sit in the center, and we will do a physical distribution. But that's going to be too slow, and we are not open 24 hours the whole day. So in the end, I decided to put some of these kits in the rental blocks, in the flats of some of these residents. So there were this concern raised up: what happened? What if this your clients, your residents, start to sell away all these kits, which is very, very valuable during that period of time? But I think we took a step. We trust the resident, we trust them, and in the end, it turned out to be a great initiative. Then another example is that for us, we work a lot with families who might have experienced family violence, children who may have experienced child abuse, and some of the survivors, some of these parents, they survived through the family violence. They saw their kids being abused. In fact, it makes them the best person to support another family who might be going through the same journey. But if we coming from a very risk-averse lens, we might be thinking that, hey, they actually went through all this. Why do you say that they are the best person? If they can't protect their own kids, what makes you think that they can protect another family's kids? So I think there will be some of these questions, but I thought we have to look at it based on the context, based on the situation that we are assessing. There are some of the situation really we have to be very, very careful, but most of the time, I think if we can take a step to trust the community, to trust the citizen, and I thought that's when the magic will happen as well. Yeah.
And I think Bee-Ling wants to come in. I think it's really important to hear her voice. Just really quickly, just to lift up, that's such an excellent exposition of what we're talking about in very practical terms. So I don't want to leave the scene of this brilliance without just parsing it apart. What you just heard there was a very elegant triage system, which I think is often the opposite of what we see helpers do. So I think what I heard you say is, first of all, in any given situation, ask, are there things that the communities can do through peer-to-peer support or in that kind of organic way? And what might we do to be useful, right, in that instance? It could be just to cheer them on, just acknowledge it. The second is, are there things, once you've done that first, are there things that the community can do with a little bit of help, where we're on tap, not on top? And then finally, there's an acknowledgement that there are things that institutions have legitimate authority for. We talked about brain surgery, and it is appropriate that the institution should do this. The virtue in what we've just heard is the sequence. I would argue that typically we're starting in number 3. What can we do for the community? And by the time we get to the community piece, it's too late. The dependence has already been built. And so I think, huge kudos. But I think one of the people in Singapore who's really led this conversation is Bee-Ling. So if I could just, I know we're against time here, but it'd be great to hear what she has to say.
Sure. Maybe we can invite Bee-Ling to just close out.
Thank you. Just a reflection. Very, very thought-provoking question from Lawrence and from you. And I've been wrapping around that question myself about closet activator. And about how come after all these years, it's always the community, it's still the professionals doing fault, and the dilemma we've been discussing today as professionals. I realized that this conversation, we all came in wearing the triangles. We all come in as professionals. And we forgot that we are circles too. We are citizens. And I think that's our problem. We forget that we are citizens. And we never ask ourselves the question, what are we doing in our own community? What are we doing in our own neighborhood? We are citizens and we are residents. Why are we not like Sarima? Why are we talking of ourselves as philanthropists, as social workers, as community workers, and not as a citizen of Yishun, a citizen of Singapore, a resident of Queenstown. And why are we not doing something about neighborhood? Why are we not bringing people together and asking, what do we care about that we need to do something? I think it starts there, and maybe the do-by will happen. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but there were such rich conversations. I think these are questions that we can continue to ponder upon, and the panel will also be around if you would like to speak with them. So once again, I'd like to thank the panel. Please join me in a round of applause for them. Thank you.
Thank you, panel speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause, please. Wasn't that such an insightful session? I think it certainly has left us with a lot of food for thought and a lot to think about as we continue with our week. Now, for our final segment this morning, we'll have Charles Tan, Senior Director of Philanthropy at the Majority Trust, to share some closing reflections for this morning. Charles, please.
Thank you, Simran. Would you just join me to just thank the panel, Cormac as well? And thank you for staying throughout and spending your precious Monday morning with us. At Majority, we like to say we do philanthropy differently. But what does different mean? I think for us, we're always questioning ourselves, how do we put community in the center? How do we put community first in all that we're doing? It's easy as an intermediary to get carried away with our role, our duty. But I think when we say doing philanthropy differently, that is what we are trying to say. And I'm very, very happy to be partners with so many of you. And the question we all ask is, what if we all do philanthropy differently? I think we can make a real difference. I know time is running short, but just to say that I think it's so important that we move away from just understanding the concept to actually practicing. I think a lot of that was the theme for today. How do we move from an idea to something that becomes reality? And the other thing to say is that that's why we have Ming Fang that joined us, just last year, and we've been actually actively working with the Yishun in the Chong Pang area, really leveraging and working with partners in the Yishun space. So Singwei, Sui Fan, Madam Sarima. We recently also partnered with GIC to run quite a big volunteering day, partnered with many of the grown-up groups over there. So I think just in ending, just like to say a big thank you for showing up. I think, this is our community as well. And what if we all put community first in all we're doing? The second thing to say is that if you want to see how community building looks like, there's no better way than to step out and get into community. So the open offer is to invite you to join us in Chong Pang. We're going to be running a series of different engagement platforms just for you to meet the community members themselves. Right? So, and in your own ways, I know many of you are also out there in the community. So let's be a community of learning, one that shares resources, knowledge. And I thought Madam Sarima made a very profound statement, which I'll use to end, which is she said, I'm sure some of you caught that. Where there's love, there's community. Where there's community, there is love. Love is pure, and love is cure. So with that, I hope the love of community drives us to continue in this journey, which sometimes can be lonely. But just to say a big thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you.